Hi. By now, most people in our Western world have heard of the word Reiki, but not everybody understands what it is or where it's come from. So Reiki is a form of hands-on healing, but what we're doing is we're channeling life force energy, also known throughout history as ki, chi, prana, mana, life force energy. And this energy has been recorded throughout history, have been used for more than 5,000 years. Now, Mikao Usui was a Tendai Buddhist, and he had gone into the monastery at the age of 4 to learn. His parents had sent him to this school. And throughout the years, he developed a real interest in healing and energy. And so as he studied through different levels through his schooling, he also started working with energy in a form of martial art. Now, back in those times in the 1900s, there were many different forms of healing on the planet, many different forms of martial art that also used this ki, chi, or prana as a way of clearing away blocked energy in the mind and the body to really speed up the healing process. And so Usui had also studied a thing called Kiko. Now, Kiko is very similar to Qigong that we use in China, or we talk about in China, and that is one of the forebearers of Tai Chi. And when he did his Kiko training, what he found was that system and most of the systems of martial arts that used energy, what they would do is they would use different techniques to build up their own energy. And then when they would lay their hands on to do healing, they would then deplete their own energy stores. So Usui was really interested in learning the hands-on healing that the Buddha and Jesus had used throughout history. And so he went on this 10-year search to find the roots of this healing and find a way to be able to develop that so that he could then share it with the world. Now, Usui really was an amazing man. When I learned Reiki in 1998, I was told an original story, but it's a rich story and it's changed throughout history as we've had more knowledge come from the Eastern world. And initially when I learnt Reiki, I was told that Usui was a Christian and that he'd been the head of a university, that he'd gone to Chicago and studied religion in Chicago, when in fact we now find that he never went to Chicago and he was not a Christian, he was a Buddhist. Now, that doesn't have any real bearing on Reiki because Reiki is non-denominational, it's not a religion at all, and anybody can use energy to channel this healing energy for healing and for helping others. However, at the time when the original story was told, it was based on the fact that Mrs. Hawayo Takata, the lady who brought Reiki to the West, she had brought Reiki to the West after World War II. Now, after that time, there was a lot of stigma about anything that came from the East. And so what she actually did was westernize the story. So I was originally taught that first story. And when I found out the truth, I was really heartbroken that this lie had occurred. But I later realized that she did whatever she felt was necessary to be able to bring Reiki to the world. So the history itself, the true history, is really interesting. So Usui, as I said, was a Tendai Buddhist. He'd been put into this Buddhist school from the age of 4. He'd grown up learning all sorts of different things, and he went on this 10-year vigil, and it took him to Kyoto. And Kyoto at the time was the capital of Japan, and he went and spoke with many different monks and learned lots of different things. He was using his Kiko, but again, he was trying to find a way to work with energy without depleting his own stores. So he ended up talking to an abbot in one of the monasteries, and the abbot told him to do what the other monks and Tendai Buddhists have done and go and meditate on Mt Kurama, also known as Horse Saddle Mountain, but to meditate for 21 days. So Usui then gathered 21 stones so that he'd be able to count the days. He went onto the mountain and each day he would throw a stone down. During that 21 days, he fasted. So he didn't eat anything for that 21 days. And he meditated. Now, it's also believed that he did chanting as many of the Buddhist monks did, and many of the people on their search for their spiritual connection did. And so when it got to that 20th day, he said, if I do not get my answer soon, I'm going to give up my quest, because he'd been sitting and meditating for all that time and did not have any understanding. Now, before he went onto the mountain, he found some Tibetan sutras in the library in the monastery, and it had some symbols because he was still researching. He didn't understand how these symbols were to be used, but it did actually start him thinking. So while he was on the mountain on that 20th day, just after he proclaimed that he was going to give up his hope, he continued to meditate. And that evening, as he looked off into the sunset, it is said that this great white light came to him and struck him in the third eye. Now, initially when he saw the light, he was afraid and wondered what it could be, thinking it might kill him. But he then started to understand that perhaps this was what he'd been waiting for all this time. So as this bright light struck him in the third eye, he then went on this mystical journey, and he saw all these bubbles of colors of every color of the rainbow. And embedded within these colors were the Reiki symbols. And it happened that they were the symbols that he'd seen while he was studying and didn't understand. But in that instant, he had a full understanding of how these symbols were to be used to help assist healing. Now, even though this story was that he was struck in the eye, what we've now found throughout history and through so much research from many people like William Lee Rand and Frank Ajava Peta, is that on that mountain, on Mt Kurama, many of the Tendai Buddhists and the monks would meditate actually under this little waterfall, where they would just have this dripping on the crown chakra. And that would activate an enlightenment for many of those people. So that's another question that nobody really knows, but they do actually believe they know where Usui now, where he meditated, and they do think perhaps this could have happened. However, we weren't there, so we don't really know. All we do know is that he had an enlightenment, a Satori moment, and he had the knowledge then of how to use this energy. Now, on his way down the mountain, Usui stumped his toe and it bled profusely. So he put his hands on that toe and the bleeding stopped instantly. And when he got down, he put his hands on his stomach to heal his own starvation. And again, the stomach healed. He went to the inn and he ordered a big meal, and the innkeeper said, "You can't eat that. You've been fasting for 21 days and it'll kill you." And he said, "Bring me the food." And of course he ate the food and he was just fine. Now, he also had the innkeeper's daughter came down with a toothache. He said, "Come here, my child." And he put his hand on her face, and that took the pain away. When he returned back to the abbot after the 21 days, he found the abbot was in bed, really, really sick. And again, he laid his hands on and he healed the abbot. So they're known as the first 4 miracles. Now, after that time, Usui went and assisted the abbot in working in the slums of Kyoto. And what they did was they healed all these beggars and sent them out. The abbot gave them instruction and learning so that they could go out and get a job. But after many months, Usui found that a lot of these people returned. And when he asked why, he realized that they hadn't learned gratitude. And so he realized that a lot of them said it's just easier for us to live in what we know, in the comfort of beggar town, rather than have to go and get a job and work for our living. So he then developed the Reiki precepts, which we use today. And those precepts really came originally from the Meiji Emperor at the time. And they are simple guidelines of how to live our life. Just for today, I let go of anger. Just for today, I let go of worry. Just for today, I count my many blessings. Just for today, I do my work honestly. And just for today, I will be kind to my neighbor and every living thing. Now, please remember, every living thing includes you. So it's also suggested you work on yourself first. Fill up your own cup and then overflow that to others. So once Mikao Usui developed these precepts, he then started to teach that so people would really understand and have gratitude for what they'd learned, so that they would then really take on that healing and really embrace it. Now, in 1922 was when Mikao Usui had that enlightenment and really found Reiki. And so he then set up a clinic, his own clinic. Actually, he set up at least 2 clinics that we know of, and started teaching Reiki to people that would come. Then a year later, the great earthquakes came through Japan. And so Usui then went around the countryside and did healing with people. And it is now believed that he taught over 2,000 people Reiki. He attuned over 2,000 people. And Mikao Usui then would go around from town to town and just hold this burning torch in the center of the town square. People would come and ask, why are you holding a torch? It's daylight. And he would say, I hold the light of truth. Anybody that wants to learn truth can come with me and learn. And so Mikao Usui ended up attuning 16 masters during that time that he had his Reiki. And one of those masters that he attuned was a man named Chijuro Hayashi. Now, Hayashi was a naval officer, a retired naval officer. And he asked Usui, about this torch, and it was told that he was able to then travel with Usui and learn the art of Reiki. And so Usui was then still teaching, and Hayashi was actually a bit of a breakaway, because he started his own clinic. And when he started his own clinic, there were 8 beds in that clinic, and he would have his students work on people in the mornings. They would have one person, so it was really like a group healing that we would call it, one person starting at the head, and the other person would start with their hands on the stomach of that patient and then work through the body. And so when they would do those healings in the morning, he would accept students on the condition that they would work in the clinic in the morning, and then they would also go out into the community. They would always do some kind of voluntary work to help people to really just heal the planet, really, and heal others. So in the afternoon, those students would then go out into the community and go to people that needed help, needed healing, and do this healing work. And so as he continued, Hayashi actually attuned 13 people to the master level of Reiki. Now, it is understood that Mikao Usui originally only had 3 levels, but it's now also thought that perhaps there were 3 other levels. However, they still used only the same 4 symbols, and the 3 levels were Shoden, also known as Reiki level 1 for us, and Okuden, which was our level 2, and Shinpiden, which is our level 3 or teacher level. Now, Usui did not call them masters, he would call them teachers, and it's now sort of evolved. Mrs. Hawayo Takata was a Hawaiian lady of Japanese descent. Now, Mrs. Takata lived on the island of Kauai in Hawaii. She'd married a man named Sachi, and she had 2 beautiful children, 2 daughters. Now, after a while, Sachi died, and so she had to work really hard to raise those children and support them. And after 5 years, Mrs. Takata became very sick, and she had abdominal pain, and she was really very sick. And she didn't know exactly what she had. However, she kept working for a while, and then her sister died. Now, because Mrs. Hawayo Takata was the eldest daughter in the family, it was then her duty to return back to Japan so that she could tell her parents about her sister's passing. So Mrs. Takata then went back to Japan and spoke to her family, and then she became even sicker. So it turned out that Mrs. Takata had a tumor she had appendicitis, she had pneumonia, and she also then had a mental breakdown. So she went into hospital and they were going to operate on Mrs. Takata. However, while Mrs. Takata lay in her bed, she kept hearing this voice in her head. There is another way. There is another way. Operation not necessary. Operation not necessary. Mrs. Takata then spoke to her doctor, and her doctor told her that his sister had gone down to this little clinic down the road, which turned out to be the clinic of Chijuro Hayashi. So the next morning, Mrs. Takata put her clothes on and she marched herself down to Hayashi's clinic. And during that time, she was treated there for 4 months and she was totally healed of all her illnesses. Mrs. Takata begged Hayashi to teach her Reiki, but because she was a Westerner, he hesitated at first, but eventually gave in and allowed Mrs. Takata to undertake the Reiki training. So Mrs. Takata stayed and trained for over a year, and eventually she was trained to level 2 or Okuden. After that time, she was to return back to Hawaii and start her own healing practice. So she went back and started doing Reiki, and Hayashi traveled over and assisted her in demonstrations and giving talks in the town square about Reiki so that he could really help her to set up her practice. He also told her that when it was time, he would call her back to Japan and she was to come back. So Mrs. Takata continued working and doing Reiki, and I've actually got a photo of her in a town square doing a demonstration, and I would think there would be probably more than 40 people watching that demonstration of Reiki. And so Mrs. Takata then woke one night and she had this dream of Hayashi standing at the foot of her bed doing this. She knew that was a sign that she was then to return back to Japan. She went back to Japan and spoke to Hayashi, and he then attuned her to the master level. He called a meeting and he told all of his 13 masters that World War II was about to break out. But he also knew, because he'd been a naval officer, that he was going to be called back out of retirement because he was still in the reserves, and that he would then be called to go into this war. As he spoke, he said that through all that he had learned, there was no way he could go back and fight and kill people. And so he announced that he would have a series of 3 strokes and burst the blood vessels in his brain, and he would die. And this is what happened. After Hayashi's death, Mrs. Takata returned back to Japan and continued teaching Reiki. Now, Hayashi died in 1940. So World War II came and went, and after that, Mrs. Takata then announced that she was the last remaining master of Reiki, the Grand Master of Reiki, the last remaining teacher. Now, we have later since found out that in fact that wasn't accurate, because I've got a copy of a letter from the Reiki people in Japan that was sent to her, and it is also known that Mrs. Takata traveled back to Japan and had meetings with the other masters. However, Mrs. Takata then westernized the story to say that Usui was a Christian, and the reason she did that was really so that we could then accept Reiki into our Western world, because after World War II, nobody wanted to have anything to do with Eastern culture or any of the studies from the East. So although it broke my heart to find out she'd made up the story, I totally understood, and I was able to let go of that judgment, because judgment is our ego. Understanding the higher purpose really does take us back to being able to accept that she did what was necessary to bring Reiki to our Western world. So Mrs. Takata, when she was doing her Reiki, she had then attuned one of her neighbors, because they were all bringing their children to her to work on. She attuned one of her neighbors, and what she found was, after a while, that the neighbor still came back and asked her to heal her children. And Mrs. Takata said, "Why do you do this? I've already taught you Reiki so that you can look after your own children." And the woman just said, "Oh, it's easier for me to bring them. It's easier for you to do it for me." So she realized then that this neighbor hadn't paid for the training and hadn't appreciated it. This is one of the reasons she then started to charge money for her treatments and really high prices for her master level for the training, because she really wanted people to value what she taught them. So she then attuned one of her sisters, and she charged her sister, and she healed her sister, and her sister then did not have that recurrence of the healing. So what we now understand, it's not just the Reiki precepts, but also that number one, there must be a change in consciousness for healing to occur. And number two, there needs to be an energy exchange. So that doesn't necessarily mean money. It can be bring me a flower, bake me a cake. But Mrs. Takata understood that in the Western world, money has a lot of value to most people. So when she did her trainings, she did teach many, many people Reiki. However, she did not attune anybody to the master level till she was in her 70s. And what she also did was she charged a $10,000 fee, because she really wanted those people to understand and to learn the value of this Reiki. Luckily, these days, most people don't charge that exorbitant fee, because we want Reiki to be spread wide and far to as many people as possible. So it's such an interesting story when we understand the history of Reiki. We now know that even Usui was really sort of disregarded by his family, because in Japan at the time, when people learned these healing arts, they wouldn't share them with so many people, and he attuned over 2,000 people. They would just hand it down from father to son and just keep things in families. So Mrs. Takata, she then attuned over 22 masters to Reiki, and from there it spread to the world. Now in 1998, the other learnings came out about the Japanese history. There were people like Franco Javapeta, who I know, who's one of my Facebook friends and who I've done some training with. And Ajava went over to Japan, and he was searching for Reiki. He and his wife, Chetnya, at the time was his wife. She was Japanese, and they actually went over to Japan searching for the roots of Reiki. And what they found was that she was actually speaking at one stage to the current president of the Reiki Gakkai, but the woman didn't let on. However, they just continued searching for clues and questions. And this is when they found that there had been a monument erected on Mt Kurama by the Reiki Gakkai, and particularly the current then president after Usui died. And this Gakkai, this monument was 10 foot high and 4 foot wide, and on it was inscribed the Japanese kanji, the story of Reiki, which was just amazing. And when Ajava and Chetnya went to, and they found that beautiful monument, she couldn't actually read it all, because a lot of it was written in old Japanese kanji. And so Mrs. Ajava's wife then took photos and went back to her mother, who was able to help decipher some of the other writings, and they ended up getting a Japanese dictionary and working on it to work out the true story of Reiki. And this is where we found that the new story came from. Now, there were many others that followed in Ajava and Chetnya's pathway, who were then able to go to Japan and connect with the Japanese Gakkai. Now, one of the Japanese people who was in the Gakkai, Hiroshi Doi, also then was accepted into the Western School of Reiki, and I believe that he studied under Ajava as well. But he was then able to bring information from the Japanese Gakkai about the Japanese style of Reiki as well. So it's just wonderful to find the richness of Reiki. Now we know that there are more than 1 million people on this planet doing Reiki. And Reiki has been a part of my life since 1998. I have hundreds and hundreds of students who've trained with me. I've got a busy practice here in Dubbo. I'm a hypnotherapist as well, and I've done clinical and 5-path hypnotherapy, NLP. I've done kinetic shift. I've done touch for health kinesiology, theta healing, Yi Dao, and lots of other different modalities. And many of those are including working with energy. And Reiki has really changed my life. Reiki, the first time I did Reiki, I'd been teaching and running fitness centers for many years, and I'd put my hands on my knees that had been swollen for 3 years with lots of different problems, and the next morning the healing was gone. I've also used Reiki to heal bone cancer when I had bone cancer, and I've worked with thousands of clients doing hands-on healing and really helping people heal their lives. So as I said, not everybody even understands what it is. So Reiki is a form of channeling or drawing that energy in from the universe, filling up our own cup first, and then flowing that energy through our hands to help heal another person or ourselves. Now, when we're doing a treatment, that person is actually drawing what they need for their own healing, but we're not depleting our own energies. We're filling up and overflowing, and that's a key difference between what we do with Reiki. And during a Reiki training, level 1, that student has 4 attunements, and this then connects them to that universal life force energy, to the flow of ki that washes through every living thing, that flows through every living thing, so that we can harness that energy to help heal ourselves and others. And level 2, there are 2 attunements, and this is the level where you will learn the Reiki symbols, and they are the symbols that Master Usui, you'll learn 3 of those symbols that Master Usui, Sensei Usui, learned when he was meditating on the mountain. And the master level, there is traditionally 1 attunement and one more symbol, the 4th symbol for Reiki. So Reiki has been a huge part of my life for more than 25 years, and I love Reiki. So if you choose to learn Reiki with me, you will also find that you'll be learning the traditional art of Reiki as I was taught many years ago. What you'll also find is there are lots of things that we add to our Reiki when we're learning, because there's so much more knowledge out there now about vibrational healing. But that's another story. That's history. So I invite you just to really find your juice, find your joy, find your path to Reiki. Reiki changed my life, and it's changed thousands of people's lives that I work with. And I love the history. So enjoy, and if you choose to come and do a workshop with me, it will be something that changes your life. I run Reiki level 1, and each person will get their own manual. Level 2 and the master's level, you'll also get a digital copy so that you can have that in your phone or on your tablet or whatever, so that you'll always have access to that. You will get your certificate, and you will also then, if you choose to go further with Reiki, it's up to you. Level 1 is generally for hands-on healing, for healing the self and our family and friends. Level 2 gives you those other symbols that will really increase the flow of energy through your hands, and also learn to use the mental and emotional symbol so that it works to help with that person's mental and emotional well-being. And the 3rd symbol is, of course, about the distance healing, which we use to send energy across time and space. And the master level will empower you to do all of these things, to be able to then teach and attune others to Reiki. And with the master level, you'll also receive your certificate and your manual and copies of the other manuals, so that you can adjust them if you want to, because I'm all about empowering people and really giving people the steps to really embrace and get on that pathway. When I did my Reiki level 1 and 2, 3 weeks later, I was doing Reiki treatments on others. And when I did my master level 3 weeks later, I had all my clients I'd been working on saying, when are you doing your masters? We want to learn this from you. So 3 weeks later, I too was teaching Reiki. Now, initially when I did my training, there were no manuals, but now there are. And my manual has grown from the first manual had 29 pages. And this level 1 manual now has 137 pages. And what I've always found is that when somebody asks a question, if I don't know the answer, I will find it and then I will add it to the next manual. And that way, we just continue to grow Reiki, and that's really what it's all about. I've also trained in Komio Reiki Do, which is a beautiful, simple style of Reiki. And that was taught to me by Haikuton Inamoto, the founder of the system in 2017. I did that training in Brisbane. And that really just brought home a lot of the things I already knew about Reiki, but just having that Japanese connection with a Buddhist monk who teaches Reiki and who I still do online healing things with was just a gift. So I encourage all of you to find your path to ways to heal yourself and others, and to connect with your own spirit, your own soul, and work on your spiritual nature, because this is one of the things that will grow you as a person, and so that you can give back to the world. So thank you for listening about our history of Reiki, and have a beautiful day. I honor all of you. Namaste.